Welcome in everybody to another Patriots Beat Live Q&A. Alex, we haven't done a Q&A in a while. We had the draft and the mock drafts that we were doing before the draft, which of course, I think we might have gotten one or two guys out of those mock drafts correct.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. We have to go back and check. Maybe Cam McGrone snuck in there in one of the mocks at some point, but we haven't done a Q&A with you guys in quite some time. So we're looking forward to answering questions. So if you do have questions, drop them in the chat. But Alex, I think just looking at the team now, post-draft, we have a pretty good idea about this roster overall and where things are going to go from here. And how are you still as optimistic about the team as we all were post-free agency, and now that they've made their draft picks and things of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there's any reason for the optimism to go down. I don't necessarily know that it's shot up. It's certainly increased. I think what's going to be unique about this team, right, is they've averaged, anywhere from 10 to 20 UDFAs the last couple of years, and that's on the 90-man roster. They have 83 players on the roster right now, not including Edelman and Chung, who are still technically on the roster but won't be come June 1st. They have 83 players, only one's a UDFA. So when you talk about that group where normally 15, 16, 17 of those guys are, automatic cuts, they're there just to make camp work and you need the bodies. Yeah. The NFL talent, the depth of NFL talent on this roster is at least 65 to 70 players deep, which I don't know that I've ever seen that before. So this is going to be an incredible training camp in terms of the position battles, in terms of the battles for roster spots. I think you're going to see a lot of guys start playing outside of their normal positions because that's what you're going to need to do to be able to make this team. I'm sure we'll talk about some of those guys today. We mentioned it a little bit on Tuesday with Chase Winovich, maybe playing some middle linebacker, in some of these draft picks, maybe playing special teams, but the NFL talent on this roster, they might not have that top end talent. Some teams do. But the depth of NFL talent, that 20 to 50 on the roster, like 1 through 10, they're about average. 20 to 50, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, and it's going to be a great camp, as a result, is we're going to see a lot of really competitive position groups from quarterback on down, right? We're going to have some great competitions in camp. And the one other thing on the UDFAs, it sounds like there are going to be a few UDFA signings from the Patriots, but the biggest reason why they haven't made UDFA signings to date as much, they did make the kicker from Michigan official today, but the biggest reason why is because the NFL right now is very up in the air about how big roster sizes are going to be going into the season and going into training camp in terms of how many players are they going to allow to be on one practice field, right? Because last year in training camp, you had two options. You could have an 80-man roster and everybody was allowed to practice in one field, or you could have a 90-man roster and split it up into two groups. And the Patriots decided to go the 80-man roster route all in one location instead of going one team, defense in stadium, offense out of the stadium sort of thing. They decided to go the 80-man route. So if they stick with the 80-man rosters, I would assume that there's going to be far less UDFA signings by the Patriots, if any, besides maybe the kicker. And if they go to 90 and they allow everybody to have 90 people out there, then I think that they're going to make some signings here. But I do want to get right into the questions. Again, if you have questions, just drop them in the chat. We're going to spend about the next hour with you guys trying to answer as many questions as we possibly can, because at this point, it's all questions, right? I mean, we know the roster, we know the draft class. It's basically all just kind of conjecture to see how this is all going to be sorted out. So the number one question I think on everybody's mind right now is this one, Alex. How long before Mac Jones becomes the starting quarterback of the Patriots? You draft a guy in round 1. Especially recently, there are very few true red shirts nowadays in terms of rookie quarterbacks. Jordan Love, Patrick Mahomes. I think Albert Breer had the stat. There's like 3 in the last 12 years or something like that you could call true red shirts that really sat their entire rookie season. So most of the time when you're drafted in the first round, you play. I think it was Mahomes, Jordan Love, and I think Paxton Lynch was the other guy who ended up not playing any games or starting any games for Denver. So where do you fall in this conversation? I think it's difficult to tell until we see Mac Jones take snaps, but where do you fall right now in terms of the leash for Cam Newton?
I think it's going to be pretty long. I do. Based on what we saw last year, and on top of that, Bill Belichick's general hesitation to put rookies in key spots right away, I think if it's up to them, Mac Jones won't play this year. I'm not saying that's what I would do, but I think that they are going to be as cautious as possible with Mac Jones. Some of it too, I hate to take the cop out here. Let's see when the bye week is. Because if they get like a week 12, week 13 bye, that makes it a little bit easier to make that switch versus if the bye is going to be week 5 or 6, right? If you want to see Mac Jones this year and you're a Patriots fan, a week from or next Wednesday, fingers crossed, as late of a bye as possible. That's what you're looking at. So I think that they're going to give Cam, if it's up to them, Cam gets the full year, I think.
I think if it was up to them, Cam would get the full year too, but Bill Belichick was pretty clear with what he said. He said, Cam's the starter until somebody plays better than him. And I don't think Mac Jones is necessarily going to bring more to the table day one or even year one because of the mobility element that Cam brings and the running element that Cam brings. But if Mac Jones can catch up as a passer and be able to handle the offense, and that maybe is a big if because Alabama was a very RPO option heavy offense. They relied a lot of shotgun and pistol. There wasn't a whole lot of under center action from Mac Jones. So if that's going to still be a big part of the Patriots offense, putting the quarterback under center, turning his back to the line of scrimmage on play action, that's a skill that Mac Jones can certainly learn, but it might take some time for him to develop in that regard as an under center quarterback because they didn't do it a ton with him at Bama. So he definitely has a lot of carryover. I think the route combinations that they use, some of the protections that they called were similar to what the Patriots do here, but there is some learning curve certainly still for Mac Jones. So I do wonder if we get to a point in the season where both of them start to play a little bit, and maybe that's later on in the year, in the second half of the year, and they kind of have a Cam Newton and a Mac Jones sort of offense. But Bill Belichick's been a little bit hesitant about doing that sort of thing in the past. He's not been a big 2 quarterback system kind of guy. It usually doesn't work at the NFL level as well as it works at the college level. So maybe that isn't going to happen, but we've seen some success with it in other places, right? New Orleans, I think, is a great example of what they did with Drew Brees and Taysom Hill. So I think there is a chance that we could see some form of 2 quarterback system towards the end of the year if Mac Jones really comes on as a passer in practice and really shows them something behind the scenes as him as a thrower versus Cam coming in and kind of doing some more of the running stuff. But we're both in the school, I think, of Mac Jones is probably not going to start until at least the second half of the season unless something goes drastically wrong with Cam or he gets hurt or something like that.
Yeah, and injuries are certainly a part of it, but it's going to take a lot. You mentioned the Belichick quote, if somebody has to play better than Cam, I think that there's levels to that. I don't think that just means whose theoretical Madden rating is higher. I think that, they're not going to put Mac Jones out there if they don't believe he can succeed. And as we've seen in the past with rookies, they want to make sure those guys are ready. They can't just be good enough. They also have to be ready for key moments at the NFL level. And I just think that for them, believing Mac Jones is at that point might take some time.
Yeah, I can agree with that. All right, let's talk about last year's rookie class. I think this is a good question. Who out of last year's group is going to make the biggest year 2 jump? I think the 2 tight ends probably not, right? I mean, I don't know if they're going to even get the opportunity to make a year 2
right.
jump.
It would take an injury, right?
Right. So there's some options though, with Duggar and Uche and Jennings, and I don't know if Michael Onwenu could get any better than he was last year. So I'm not sure if that's even possible. But who's someone that you could see taking a big year 2 leap?
So I'll give you 2, and actually neither one were draft picks. They're both UDFAs. One is going to be Isaiah Zuber, and we saw flashes last year from him where he looked like there was some potential there for kind of gadget plays. I also wonder, the reason they signed him, I think, I don't know this for sure, but 2 and 2 together, he was an All-American kick returner at Mississippi State. That was mainly his game, not so much offense. They need, as we saw last year, Gunnar Olszewski, great punt returner, struggled in kickoff return. So I wonder if I think Zuber would have a chance to make the team. as a gadget, like hybrid running back receiver, and then as a kick returner. And I think there's a lot of upside for him in that role. So I'm looking at him as a guy who, you know, maybe it's not like, maybe he doesn't end up the most talented of the year 2 players, but if you want to talk about the biggest jump, right? The biggest jump in impact from year 1 to year 2, I think Isaiah Zuber absolutely could be a factor for this team this year. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Miles Bryant. We saw that last game of the year was a real roller coaster, right? He took a bad route to a ball. He dropped an interception, but then he came back and factored in on 2 turnovers. He had that, a couple great plays on the LA trip. He's a guy who is trending in the right direction at the end of this season. It looks like they're going to need a second deep safety. He can play some of that. Maybe he plays some outside corner, which he did in college. He might not be able to do that at the NFL level because of his size, but there's going to be opportunities for him to make an impact. I thought he was a really talented player when they picked him up last year. I thought he might have been their best UDFA pickup, and now he's going to have a chance to show that. So Isaiah Zuber, Miles Bryant, 2 guys I'm really looking forward to this year.
I'm looking forward to Miles Bryant as well because, first of all, he's got great Patriot versatility, right? He has the ability to play safety. He has the ability to play nickel corner, so he can move inside. I think he can move back. I wouldn't necessarily put him outside either, but I think he can certainly play in the slot as a man coverage guy or play on the deep half or maybe rotate into the box as a zone defender. So there's a lot of options there in terms of his versatility. His size is always going to be a concern, and maybe that's why he becomes more of a passing downs player and might not be an every down player, but in a nickel package, in a dime package, where he's the 5th or 6th DB, I think he can carve out a role. I also just want to go to the top of the draft class and look at Kyle Duggar because I do feel like as a guy that comes from the D2 level at Lenoir-Rhyne, it was definitely going to be a little bit of a learning curve for him coming into the NFL game. And last year we saw flashes of it, right? We saw it in instances. Again, the Baltimore game, I think, was a great game for him to kind of outline what his potential could possibly be. I also think they're going to play him a little bit more deep than they did this past year, maybe a little bit more in that Devin McCourty type of role where he's roaming over the top or he's playing in a robber over the middle and trying to ball hawk and hunt the football. So I think that they're looking for him. Okay, year 1, you're dipping your toes in the water. You're getting used to the speed of the game going from D2 to the pro level. We know that you're a very good athlete. He seems to be a pretty instinctive football player as well. Now year 2 should be the time where Kyle Duggar should take off, right? And I think he's got all the physical tools in the world to do it. So I'm really looking forward to seeing both just his impact and what he does, but also how they use him, because I think it might change a little bit based off of how they used him last year. They sort of wanted him to be the Chung successor last year, it felt like, right? Play in the box, guard tight ends, that sort of thing. I wonder if they look at that tape and say, this guy is such a freak athlete. He plays the game so quickly that if we just let him roam in the middle of the field and hunt the football and tackle guys in space and things of that nature, he's going to be a really impactful, just every blade of grass, right? A guy that can really touch every blade of grass. Whereas if you play him against tight ends, he's really got one specific assignment and one specific role. So I'm really fascinated to see if they change up his role in the defense a little bit as we come into this year. I mean, Jalen Mills is there. They just drafted Joshua Bledsoe. I know he's a 6th round pick, but he's also more of that down safety, strong safety, Chung type of player. Miles Bryant, definitely a guy that's probably going to be more in that type of mold as well. So they have some depth there in terms of guys that are going to play closer to the line of scrimmage. So the Patriots didn't draft the corner, Alex, and Stephon Gilmore remains up in the air, as does JC Jackson in terms of his contract situation after next season. All the reports out there that Gilmore wouldn't say no to coming back to the Patriots, right? If the money makes sense, as any player would tell you, if you pay me, I'll stay, right? So I don't think that there's any reason to believe that Stephon Gilmore wouldn't stay if the money was right. But do you see the Patriots re-signing Stephon Gilmore? I think this is a very Aqib Talib, Darrelle Revis type of situation where he's over 30. They got the best football out of him, and now maybe they look to get the next guy in here, or maybe they'll break the mold, because the mold, Ty Law, Asante Samuel, Aqib Talib, Darrelle Revis, the mold is to move on, right? That's the traditional Belichick approach. Is Gilmore different?
I don't know that Gilmore's different. The situation's different.
Yeah.
When you moved on from Ty Law, you had Asante Samuel. When you moved on from Asante Samuel, you know, they went into that the longest drought they had under Belichick without a championship game appearance was 3 years. Bill put the clamps on that when he brought in Talib. And then when they moved on from Talib, they got Revis. When they moved on from Revis, there was a gap year with Butler and then Stephon Gilmore. So the point being, outside of that one gap after Samuel where things really didn't go well, and Bill has made a point since then of always having, you know, a stocked cornerback room, they've always kind of had the next guy ready. And that's why I thought, okay, if they take a corner high in the draft, you can move on. You can move on from Stephon Gilmore. You have that next guy there. They have tremendous depth at slot corner. But on the outside, can they move on from Gilmore? I don't know. Because you have J.C. Jackson on one side. He's signed to a one-year deal. And then it's Juwan Williams and Michael Jackson basically competing for the other spot. I don't know that they have any other true outside corners on the roster. Evan, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe D'Angelo Ross,
unless they
can fill that role a little bit.
I think, you know, the question really is, and the guy
he's like 5'10", isn't he? He's not like their typical outside corner.
He's definitely more. Maybe you move him inside and outside. If
he's more traveling. Of a Malcolm Butler. Oh no, he's 5'9" actually.
So the guy that should be taking over this role is Juwan Williams. The question is do they feel like Juwan Williams is capable of taking on that role? And at times when he gets out there in preseason games, when he gets out there at the end of last season, they do play him at outside corner. He has been okay. You know, he's held up. It hasn't looked like he's overwhelmed. It hasn't looked like he's out of place playing on an NFL field at outside corner. So you do wonder if Juwan Williams is capable of doing that. Now, do I love a cornerback tandem in 2022 of J.C. Jackson and Juwan Williams? Absolutely not. And that's when drafting a corner definitely comes into play. Usually Bill Belichick's prepared, right? Usually he has a guy a year before he needs him. Right. And that's why we talked about J.C. Horn and we talked about Patrick Surtain. We talked about all these corners in the draft so much in the lead up was because we expected Bill Belichick to see that 2-year window. And the board just didn't really break their way at that position. You know, Horn and Surtain go early at 8 and 9 in the draft. They didn't have an opportunity to draft a first round corner. I guess you could have come back and gotten somebody like a Fetty Melifonwu in the Ronnie Perkins slot or something like that. But I'm not sure if they necessarily saw a guy like Melifonwu as a system fit. I think he's more of a zone Seattle style cover 3 type of corner, not a man-to-man. Maybe like a guy like Elijah Molden, who's more of a slot type, you know, Tyrann Mathieu type. That's not exactly what they needed. So there wasn't a ton of outside cornerback depth in this draft to begin with, and they sort of missed the boat with the picks in Jones and Barrymore and kind of getting one of those guys. So it's going to be fascinating to see, because now I feel like they are kind of in a situation where they're going to have to pay Gilmore or JC. They're going to have to pay one of them. I really feel like to let both of those guys walk and have a completely new cornerback room in 2022 is going to be extremely risky. So it does feel like they're going to have to pay one of those two guys, and maybe Gilmore on a 3-year deal or something like that ends up being the better investment, because you know you're going to get CB1 level play, whereas J.C. Jackson, when he came up to guard Stephon Diggs, or he came up to take Brashad Perryman in those games where he had those CB1 auditions, he was a little rocky. You know, he was a little rocky, and he still has a lot to prove. I think that he can be that true number one guy and not just kind of be a 1B or a 2A, but be a legitimate number one NFL cornerback, especially in an extremely man-heavy scheme like the Patriots, where they're going to want him to shadow somebody. You know, they're going to want him to go out and get Stephon Diggs. They're going to want him to go out and get Jalen Waddle, you know, or whoever it ends up being, right? That he's going to have to take that guy on an island, and last year he did have some issues with it. All right, I don't want to
wait. Hang on, let me just add, just in terms of this year, right? Because you're kind of talking a year or two down the road. In terms of this year, this can still evolve. And I wrote about this today, 985thesportshub.com. There's some interesting free agent options out there, because I think even if they find a way to keep Gilmore and Jackson, they still need a third outside corner this year. You still need that guy who can split those two. You don't know if Juwan Williams can be that guy reliably. Jason McCourty is definitely a guy who could return. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, when Jerrion Connolly was in the draft, they were like heavily linked to him that year, right? and then he ended up going to the Raiders. I for whatever reason, I remember them being linked to him or a bunch of people saying he was a fit. Garyon Connolly's a free agent. There's a couple interesting names elsewhere, Brashad Breeland, but one that really stood out to me, Evan, and we've kind of heard this, every couple of years we get into this, is Richard Sherman.
Yeah.
And
he said some not nice things about the Patriots in the past. Though,
he has, but he is, build-wise, he's what Bill Belichick wants in a corner.
Yeah, it's what everybody wants in a corner.
In their system, he can probably play some deep safety too if he'd be open to that. And people have talked in the past about what a fit it would be if you could get Richard Sherman and Bill Belichick's defense. I don't know if it happens, but he still wants to play. I think the Patriots are going to offer him as good of a chance as any to play regular snaps and play a regular role. So, maybe whether it's Chase McCourty, whether it's Sherman, whoever it is, I think there's another corner that's going to be added at some point here down the line before we know what ends up happening with Stephon Gilmore. Because just as a reminder, something has to happen. He's not going to play this year for $7 million, nor should he. So one way or the other, there's going to be a resolution.
So my hesitation with Richard Sherman has nothing to do with what he said about the Patriots, but he has been in Seattle's system his entire career, other than that year with San Francisco, which is also a very similar system to Seattle's.
He's been a zone corner.
This is my side of the field. I'm going to play the deep third. I'm going to match routes vertically. That's been his whole career. They did do a little bit of man stuff in Seattle every once in a while, and he did travel at times in situational stuff, third down, fourth quarter, close game, that kind of deal. But for the most part, it was Richard Sherman, right cornerback. You got the right side. Everybody else worry about everything else. And this guy is going to lock up his man. And they do play a lot of cover 3 Mabel, which means that the backside corner, which was often Richard Sherman, was locked on man-to-man while the rest of the defense was playing zone. So he has some man experience, but certainly not as much man experience as what they asked them to do here in New England.
Well, that's why I wonder, if he comes and plays more safety here, and then you have him as that third corner if you need him. So kind of a split role. It would be a different role.
Is he going to play deep safety? I mean, he's not going to play the deep third. I wouldn't think. I mean, maybe he does. I don't know. I don't know if Richard Sherman's schematic it is great. I love the idea. The Patriots have always done this. It used to be more prevalent, obviously, in the Brady era, but now we can kind of get back to that maybe with some of the free agent signings of these veteran players like Richard Sherman, who might have one last go of it, right? One last big season in the tank, and they kind of get these guys. So maybe, you can, I wouldn't bash the move by any means if they did it. I just have some hesitations about the scheme and whether or not Richard Sherman is really the best option for them with the way that they run their defense. Let's move on, though, to this question. I don't really know if I want to even entertain Julio Jones, but let's just discuss it briefly in terms of...
For a second. We'll discuss it for a second.
Does it make sense? Yes, I do. So Richard Sherman in terms of... Julio Jones in terms of the contract... It's about a $15 million deal for the team that acquires him. He's got a $15.3 million base salary. So it's not exorbitant. It's not over $20 million or something like that. The Patriots would have to move some money around, but it's doable from a contractual standpoint. It's obviously attractive from just an on-field standpoint. But is this any type of realistic? Because I still feel like there's no way that this actually happens.
And is he in the last year of his deal? I'm just pulling that up right now. I'm not sure.
No, he's not. So he has one more full year in that contract, and then he does have an out in 2022. So you're looking at
an $8 million out.
Yeah,
that's not.
We'd have to get Miguel in here and have him talk about the dead cap situation for the team acquiring the player via trade. It's not exactly the same as what it would be for Atlanta. I think it's a little bit lower just because a lot of those bonuses and stuff like that don't carry over. So I don't think the dead cap is quite as bad for the team acquiring him, but the contract for the player is somewhat reasonable. There are, Julio Jones is getting older. He's been banged up a little bit, but I don't know. We love wide receivers in New England. They haven't had one that everybody can sink their teeth into since like Healthy Edelman or Brandon Cooks or whatever. So everybody is clamoring for the big name wide receiver here.
Yeah, I'm not going to say don't do it because he's just such a good player, but at the same time, what you'd have to do to manage it cap wise, you would have to retool the offense a little bit. It would probably ultimately end up being worth it, but I think you can achieve the same result by just like if you do that right, and he's got multiple years. I said this last week, right? I'm looking at next year in a very strong wide receiver draft class next year, and they're going to be in a position where they really can go out and get aggressive at that. Bringing Julio Jones in just for this year kind of takes that off the table when you look at his contract. If he was on a one-year deal, I'd be a lot more open to it because you're basically just replacing N'Keal Harry on the roster with Julio Jones, which is obviously a massive upgrade. But I just don't think for a guy who's been hurt as much as he has and at his age, it's worth taking on that contract right now. I would like if they did it, I wouldn't be upset. But I don't know that it
can't be upset.
Yeah, right.
If they get Julio Jones, it's impossible to be upset. I actually think it. Look, I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's likely. I don't think Bill Belichick will do it. I would do it. I would do it. And the reason being is that the Patriots have two tight ends. I like Nelson Aguilar as a fit in their Z receiver role. They don't have a true X on the team. And we've talked about this before of them maybe playing Hunter Henry a little bit at the X. Maybe N'Keal Harry finally breaks out of his shell a little bit. But Julio Jones at the X with this offense is scary. I mean, it's just scary to have all those weapons out there. I feel like if the Patriots are truly being uncharacteristically aggressive, as we said all offseason, they've done it all offseason. They drafted a quarterback in the first round. They spent like crazy in free agency. If they're truly doing all of those types of things, if Julio Jones is available for the right price, I wouldn't pay a second-round pick for him. I'd probably pay a fourth or fifth-round pick for him just because of the contract. But if he's available for the right price, then I would definitely pull the trigger. And the other thing,
let me ask you, I would pay more if he's willing to restructure his contract.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Maybe I think a second, if he's willing to restructure that down to a one-year deal, absolutely, no hesitation.
I think the hesitation on his part, if Brady's still here, he does that in a heartbeat, right? But the problem is because Brady's not still here and because there is some uncertainty about the quarterback play, if he could come in here, have Brady and go for 1,500 yards and then sign another big contract after that, after restructuring for 2021 to come to New England, then I think he'd be more open to it. But the other thing I wanted to say about the Patriots with wide receivers is they have made it clear now since the N'Keal Harry draft, so basically the last two drafts, that they're hesitant to spend a premium pick on a wide receiver. They passed on two of the best wide receiver classes that we've seen until the seventh round with Trey Nixon, and I'll get to him in a second. But if they're going to be a team that's going to acquire wide receiver talent through veteran options, through free agency or via trade, then a guy like Julio Jones via trade is something that should be on the table because they're not going to go out there necessarily, as we've seen the last two drafts, and spend another first-round pick on a wide receiver because they missed on N'Keal Harry and they missed on Aaron Dobson, they missed on Chad Jackson. And I think it's a tough position for them to evaluate from a college perspective. So I don't see Bill Belichick doing it again. I don't see him, as much as I love John Mechie from Alabama or some of the wide receivers that are coming out next year. I just don't see Bill Belichick dipping back into the early draft wide receiver.
We also didn't see him taking a quarterback in the first round this year. I think it's a new era.
I think
they're going to start being a little more
they've just
traditional, not traditional, but I think they're going to start acting like some of these other teams act in the draft and in free agency.
They've just swung and missed so much that, look, they signed Nelson Aguilar, they signed Kendrick Bourne, and then they don't draft a receiver until the seventh round. It just feels to me like they're focused on adding veteran receivers because they know that they can scout it a little bit easier because they can see the translations into a pro scheme. Whereas versus the college game, it's a much simpler system. It's a much simpler passing game, and it's difficult to project for them. So if they're going to go the veteran route, it doesn't necessarily need to be Julio Jones. That's just the big name that everybody's attracted to. But if it's another veteran option, then they need to continue to make trades and they need to continue to make free agent signings at that position if they're not going to draft receivers early. Now, maybe they do break the mold again next year, or maybe they have me eat my words and they take a wide receiver in the first round next year and all this means nothing. But if they're going to continue to ignore that position in the top 100, then they need to go out there and spend at that position. They need to invest capital at that position. So that's why I just feel like if Julio's available for the right price, if Odell Beckham's available for the right price, if any of those types of players are available at a price point that they feel comfortable with, they're not going to draft a receiver in the first round. I'm saying if this is their mindset, then these types of players should be on the table for them to upgrade at that position. So here's an interesting question as we continue this wide receiver conversation about taking a wide receiver, and he talks about Mike here, situational wide receivers. And I wanted to take this opportunity. The last couple of days, I've dug into some UCF tape and Trey Nixon, and did Ernie Adams might have found themselves a little late round gem. I'm not going to sit here and say that he's going to be David Givens or he's going to be Julian Edelman or anything like that. But he's a deep threat. He's a guy that can stretch the field. He's a vertical route runner. He's a vertical receiver. And the one thing that you definitely see out of these UCF guys, and with Nixon in particular, is the ability to get off press coverage at the line of scrimmage. And I kind of feel like Ernie Adams said, oh, well, N'Keal Harry, that was his biggest issue that he's had. And we went that route with that pick. I'm going to get a guy that can actually move off the line of scrimmage. I've been really impressed with Trey Nixon's press release package, his ability to get off press coverage and get himself vertical up the field. I don't know if he's going to be as fast in the NFL in terms of taking the top off as he was in college, but I think he can definitely get open at the line of scrimmage and get off that press coverage. So if you're talking about situational receivers and a deep threat, I actually think they did take one. It just didn't happen until the 7th round.
Yeah, and isn't a slot receiver kind of the ultimate situational receiver? So I would argue Belichick has done this. The other thing is the reason it's a little different. The thing about a situational pass rusher is the situation going in, right? That it's an obvious passing situation. That's why you put that guy on the field. I think to have like a situational player on offense is tough because you want to do your best to not necessarily let the other team know what your situation is, right? If you just have a guy who's out there running deep routes and he comes on the field, everybody knows what the call is. It's kind of like what Demir Byrd was last year, I think. But the situational thing, there's the third down running back, sure. But it's third down, it's passing back, and you have to hand the ball to that guy.
Well, they've had this issue with running backs.
Right,
Sonny Michel's been very typecasted into that. Exactly. We're going to run the ball, 80% of the time when he's on the field. Or something.
So I don't mean to shoot the question down. It's a good question. I understand where you're coming from. Situational players as a concept is much more difficult to achieve offensively than it is defensively. Because again, defense is reactionary. You kind of know what the situation is going in. Offensively, you're trying to leave, even if it's, 3rd and 13, you want to leave as many possibilities on the table as possible before the ball is snapped. So the defense has to prepare for as many different situations as possible.
Yeah, I'm just saying, go watch some Trey Nixon tape.
Trey Nixon's
better than I thought. I'm not going to sit here and say that this 7th round pick is going to turn into a Hall of Famer. I'm not saying anything crazy like that, but I was impressed. It was a lot better than I thought it was going to be. And they've had some good wide receivers from there. Gabriel Davis, Jacob Harris. They've had 3 wide receivers now drafted in the last 2 years. That's a program that is sort of brewing some NFL wideout talent. And the press release package, his press release package, and I hate to rag on N'Keal Harry, but his press release package and his ability to get into vertical routes off the line of scrimmage is better than N'Keal Harry's. And N'Keal Harry is a 1st round pick. So I think that there's a lot to like about Trey Nixon's tape as a 7th round pick, right? Not saying he's going to turn into Randy Moss, but as a 7th round pick, I think there's something there.
He can catch the ball at all 3 levels. And I brought up Demir Byrd earlier. I don't think he's, the exact same player. He's
a little bit bigger,
right. And stronger. But you know what? If the 242nd pick in the draft turns into Demir Byrd, who, has had a successful NFL career and he just got signed again by the Bears and he's an NFL caliber wide receiver. If that's what the 242nd pick turns into, you did okay.
Yeah, Demir Byrd, somebody I think his routes were a little bit rounded at the top of it, and he was not a physical downfield ball tracker, right? He had issues with finishing through contact, and that was a big reason why he couldn't complete a lot of those deep balls when he did get behind the defense. And Nixon's a little bit bigger. He's not as fast. He's like a low 4.4 guy, where Damiere Byrd's like 4.26 or 4.27 or something like that. But there was more to like there than I thought. If I had to look.
Yep. Did we lose Evan?
Where he can move inside and outside and get a little bit vertical. So I think that there's some elements of his game like that. All right, let's move on to the defensive side of the ball, as we just spent about 20 minutes on Trey Nixon and talk about Josh Uche and his role next season. I think this is a fascinating one because there are not a lot of reps at edge, right? There's not a lot of outside linebacker reps. You got to think that Matt Judon and Kyle Van Noy are going to eat up a lot of those snaps in terms of the edge defender role. So where does Josh Uche fit into the puzzle? I would love to see them keep him at off the ball linebacker a little bit and use his explosiveness and his athleticism to be more of a run and chase type of player, a pursuit type of player from the second level.
Sure. I mean, I think all of these guys are going to try to have to find ways to, like I said in the open, to make themselves available for more snaps. I think Chase Winovich is a guy you look at maybe moving back and playing some more off the ball. So, I think we're going to see it in camp. I think we're going to see a lot of these guys playing out of position and trying to prove that, hey, I might be just as good as player X, but I can also play 3 spots. Player X can only play 2, things like that. So I don't know if Uche ends up off the ball like primarily, but I think that we're going to see him try it. And I think we're going to see a lot of guys try moving around.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have to, especially on defense. You have a lot of these guys now, even with the draft class, with Ronnie Perkins in the mix as well. They go 7-8 deep at edge now, and that's a good thing to have. It's a good problem to have. But these guys are going to have to fight it out and figure out places to find, roles and to find snaps, to find playing time. All right, a lot of questions still, Alex, rolling in about Julio. A lot of questions still rolling in about Mac Jones. We've talked about this one a little bit in our pre-draft discussions, but I think it's interesting, a comparison of a floor ceiling type of comparison for Mac Jones, because I think you hear things all over the place, right? Some people think he's Kirk Cousins or Derek Carr or something like that. Some people think he's Tom Brady, right? So it's very volatile with Mac Jones. But what are your best floor or ceiling comparisons for him?
So, all right, before I give that, let me explain, because I figured out the perfect way to explain Mac Jones, but it's kind of niche and like super nerdy, but I'm going to give it my best shot. So if anybody plays the video game MLB The Show, right? When you draft players in that game, normally their overall is like a 50 and their potential is like a 90, right? Like basically when you draft a player, their overall super low, their potential super high, and they end up somewhere in the middle. It's rare to find guys with like playable overalls in the draft because that's just how baseball works and try to mimic it. Every once in a while, though, you'll get a guy who's like a 70, 75 overall right out of the draft. But 99% of the time, their potential is also a 75 and basically, or lower. And basically what it means is, hey, this guy's really good, really young, but he's just kind of flatlined. So that's kind of what I see Mac Jones as. Did that make any sense to you?
Yeah, it does.
So that being said, my comp is a very close friend of mine's dad, who's been a season ticket holder since the 70s and likes to make fun of me for being, a fan of certain players, namely Drew Bledsoe. He texted me during the draft and said, there you go. They got Bledsoe. Are you happy? Like, meaning to like tease me, but Drew Bledsoe made multiple Pro Bowls, was a top 5 quarterback in the league at one point, took the team to a Super Bowl. If Mac Jones is Drew Bledsoe, which I don't think is completely unrealistic, that's a great pick.
Well, he doesn't play anything like Drew Bledsoe.
I know, but I think people so when I see career comp, I assume that means like career arc, not stylistically. Stylistically, I love the Pennington one. And people use that as a knock. Chad Pennington was, for like 10 years there, statistically the most accurate quarterback in football history.
He also barely threw the ball down the field. Chad
Pennington's downside was not his ability. It was a shoulder injury.
Right.
And look, do you need to be able to, especially with some of the, a guy like Jonnu Smith, who, Evan, when they signed him and you were trying to convince me, Jonnu Smith over Hunter Henry, you were telling me what he does after the catch, what he does after the catch, what he does after the catch. Okay. They have that guy. I think they're going to continue to add yak receivers. Maybe Mac Jones can't throw the ball down the field. If they get guys who can create like he had at Alabama, so problem solved.
So I have a player comparison. I floated this one by you earlier when we were texting about this question, and I think that Patriots fans are also going to hate it. But I want to throw it out there anyways because I think
I know which one it is, and you got to let me clarify it right after you say it, because I don't think you know how to say it correctly.
I'm going to try to say it correctly. I am not comparing what I think Mac Jones's career resume could be or his intangible qualities in terms of clutch gene and leadership.
Well, you're doing the exact opposite of what I just did.
I am just telling you who I see when Mac Jones plays football, where the way he moves, the way he throws the football, the way he processes things. I see Tony Romo. I see a guy that moves around decently well in the pocket, that makes quick reads with the ball, that throws accurately to all three levels, that has enough arm, but certainly doesn't have the biggest arm in the world, and is a really smart, instinctive football player. And I think we've all seen now with Tony Romo's career in broadcasting just how smart of an X's and O's and football mind he really is. That all was prevalent on his tape, but I think it got lost in he fumbled the extra point snap in the playoff game, and he never won the big game, and Dez caught it, and all that garbage. I'm not saying that Mac Jones is going to be a dud in the playoffs, right? Or he doesn't have the clutch gene. He certainly did at Alabama, so I think he's got a little bit more cojones, if you will, than a guy like Tony Romo in the big moments. But in terms of the way that he plays the game and the style in which he plays the game, it reminds me a lot of Romo. And similar to your comparison about Drew Bledsoe, Tony Romo had a much better career than people think, right?
See, this is just why I have trouble with that comparison. And I know this goes against what you said, but I think when you say somebody will be a more clutch Tony Romo, that's like saying a player is a clean Vontaze Burfict, or a slow Deshaun Jackson, or a smaller Trent Brown. It's just like that's the signature trait. It's so hard for, like, I think some people,
because I'm saying when
I know you see it from the tape,
right?
I'm just saying that when I think Tony Romo, the first thing that comes up is, oh boy, he's not like. Is there somebody else who played like Tony Romo who got to the conference championship?
I would just rather compare him to somebody like Tony Romo, who had a really good regular season NFL career, right? A guy that put up numbers in the regular season, then compare him to like Kirk Cousins. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It seems like I would much rather that comparison as a Patriots fan than somebody like a Kirk Cousins or a Derek Carr or some of these middling quarterbacks that I hear.
I think he can be a little better than that. I will point out, somebody brought up AJ McCarron. And I know why.
I think his floor is higher than AJ McCarron.
I think he's a better quarterback right now than AJ McCarron ever was.
Yeah, I agree.
Plain and simple. And I always thought AJ McCarron was a little underrated. I thought he could be, I guess he has been like a career backup, like a serviceable backup. But so here's the difference. And this goes back to the whole Alabama quarterback thing that we talked about on Tuesday, right? That people say, oh, Alabama quarterbacks always suck. Well, no, Alabama just never produced NFL quarterbacks because they didn't recruit heavily at the position, and they ran an antiquated offense. That's just what they looked for. Blake Sims won a national championship with Alabama as a quarterback. He was playing arena football in Japan as a safety 2 years later. Jake Corker, I think, owns a farm now, and he won a national championship. Like, Alabama was just looking for a guy who could hand the ball off 40 times and make the safe throws when they needed him to make them. AJ McCarron came in at the end of that era. What happened was the SEC, right? You see all the spread offense now, and it started in the Big 12, and then it hit the Pac-12, and now it's getting into the Big 10. All these college offenses started opening up, running the spread, running much more high-octane offenses. The SEC was kind of the last conference. They were the last conference to do that. And it started happening at Texas A&M with Johnny Manziel, and then you saw it at Kentucky a little bit. Florida sort of brought it in, although unsuccessfully at first. And Alabama was really one of the last schools to make that change. But Nick Saban realized at a certain point, if they didn't catch up, they were going to lose recruits and they were going to lose games because wide receivers wanted to play in that system. And at a certain point, you just weren't going to be able to win shootouts against teams you needed to win shootouts against running the old system Alabama did. So they implemented a more modern, a more advanced system that relied a lot more on the quarterback, both physically and mentally. That's where Jalen Hurts was really the first quarterback to run that system. Tua kind of mastered it the next year, and then you had Mac Jones. So Mac Jones isn't from this Jake Corker, A.J. McCarron, Blake Sims, Freddie Kitchens, Alabama quarterback tree. It really changed about 4 years ago, and that's why you just have to – I know it's easy to make that comparison. I know you want to make it. You have to throw it out. It's not there. It doesn't exist. It doesn't make sense.
So Nick Saban did a coaching clinic that I think this offseason, and the videos, some of the people I follow, like James Light and some of the other coaches that are on Twitter, have been sharing some of the excerpts from it. And one of them is breaking down just that he recognized, he said like 4 years ago, that the game has changed. Right. And he and Bill Belichick, he mentioned him and Bill Belichick came up with ball control, running the football, playing good defense, playing good in the kicking game. Those were the things that won football games back in the day, right? 30 years ago, that's what every coach was being taught by their predecessors and by their bosses, was we're going to win the game by running the football and playing good defense. And Nick Saban said the college game's changed. And I recognized that 4 years ago, that we needed to be a passing team. We needed to put up points. We needed to recruit quarterbacks and recruit wide receivers and recruit talent on the offensive side of the ball way more than we had been doing. And we also had to change systemically and change schematically. So they became a very RPO heavy offense. Instead of under center play action, they went to RPO stuff in shotgunner and pistol, and they recruited all these wideouts, Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle and Henry Ruggs and Jerry Jeudy, and they started recruiting top quarterbacks and all this stuff, and they changed their philosophy completely. And that's a really good I'll try to find it and I can tweet it out. But Nick Saban talking about how they recognized that they were only going to compete at the highest level like Alabama wants to be at if they outscore people. They recognized that they weren't going to be able to just play good defense and win national championships anymore. They were going to have to outscore people. And that was a big part of that philosophical change. Let's answer this
real quick. That's my Blake. They didn't win a title with Blake Sims. They lost to Ohio State that year, but
correct yourself.
No, I want to make sure I get any. By the way, he is back to playing QB, so good for Blake Sims. I was like, he's a fun guy to watch, but it's not the same thing.
So you see Martavis Bryant plays football in Massachusetts now?
Okay, hang on. The Massachusetts Pirates receiver room, if it was 2015, is stuck.
Pretty good.
They have Martavis Bryant. They have Terrence Williams, right, who played for the Cowboys, and they have Dexter McCluster. That's like a team.
I just saw Martavis Bryant. It didn't count. The catch didn't count. It's one of those buzzer beaters after the buzzer that didn't count type thing. But he made a great catch, and they put it on Twitter. And I was like, wow, he's playing football, professional football, getting paid in Massachusetts. Do you want to answer this question about Braxton Barrios? Because I feel like,
by the way, they also have Trey Jackson.
Oh, okay.
Mass Pirates. So there you go.
I feel like you probably know everything there is to know about Braxton Barrios. So I think the the short answer here is Gunnar Olszewski, right? I mean, Gunnar.
No, because they weren't the same year. Braxton was the year before.
So but he was in Gunnar's rookie camp, wasn't he? Weren't both those guys together when Gunnar came in as a rookie?
No, because Braxton Barrios never played, if I'm correct, never played for the Patriots. I don't think he ever. No, he didn't, because he.
I thought that was where the overlap was, but maybe I'm mistaken. I thought that Jacoby Myers and Gunnar Olszewski were the ones that were in that camp with Braxton Barrios.
Yeah, you know what? So it wasn't his rookie year. Because he was on IR his rookie year, and then you're right, he was in camp with them in 2019.
Yeah.
So that would be. I don't know why they cut him. They should have kept him. He was a good player. Like I don't have an answer to that question. Maybe it is Gunnar, but they're not similar receivers. Gunnar was certainly better on special teams. And remember, they cut Demaryius Thomas too. So this isn't even the question here. Like, it should be why they cut Demaryius Thomas, but that's a whole, Barrios wasn't with the Saints. Now you're thinking of Austin Carr. This is all the same player. It's just different iterations.
I think you're thinking of Austin.
No, somebody in the chat said Barrios was with the Saints.
Okay, yeah,
that's Austin Carr.
Yeah. So sorry, I'm pretty positive that Braxton. No,
you're right. They were both there in
Gunnar
2019.
Yes.
He might have been hurt during camp in 2019.
He was always hurt when he was with the Patriots.
He still might have been dealing with, he spent his entire time with the Patriots on IR.
Yeah.
There was, that might have had something to do with that.
So Jacoby Myers is a better receiver than Braxton Barrios. So that's why he made the team. And then Gunner's a better returner than Braxton Barrios. So I think that was but truly, I think the matchup was Barrios versus Gunner. I actually thought we saw some of the flashes of Barrios and what he did with the Jets this past season in that 2019 camp. I just don't think his return ability was as explosive at this level as it was in college. And that really hurt his chances of making a hay here in New England. But I don't know. Gunnar Olszewski is your all-pro punt returner now, so I feel like that decision really makes a lot of sense.
Gunnar Olszewski all-pros 1, Braxton Barrios all-pros none. And look, if their biggest miss in the last 3 years was cutting Braxton Barrios, it's pretty good. That's pretty good if that's your biggest miss. So they did okay.
Yeah,
I wouldn't lose. It's a fair question, but I wouldn't lose sleep over it.
Yeah, me too. All right, let's talk about JJ Taylor because I think this is a really interesting sort of question here. I'm just checking.
Oh, hang on. Actually, we have breaking news here.
Yeah. So Jason McCourty, that's why I was looking at my phone. Okay. Jason McCourty, a 1-year deal to the Miami Dolphins. So no return to New England
reunion
for Jason McCourty. Flores reunion. I had gotten an inkling that maybe Jason McCourty was not going to be back here. Even after the draft, it didn't seem like the Patriots reached out to try to rekindle that flame. So Jason McCourty, 1-year deal with Miami. This makes a lot of sense. Brian Flores reunion, similar system, going to do a lot of the same things. And I think Brian Flores obviously knows the leadership qualities that Jason McCourty brings to the table as well for some of his younger cornerbacks. So Jason McCourty is not back with the Patriots. So that's one that we can cross off, Alex, in terms of that. Who's that third outside corner? Who's that veteran corner that they might sign? That market's getting very, very thin at this moment. So if they're thinking of bringing in somebody else, the options are bare. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I said it before and I'll say it again. I think their biggest need now is who is that third outside corner behind Jackson and Gilmore. Is it going to be Juwan Williams? Are they going to give Michael Jackson a shot at it? That's a question that needs answering because the reality is Gilmore's coming off, not a nothing injury. Obviously, he wasn't as bad as it looked at the time, but a relatively severe injury. J.C. Jackson, I believe, missed a couple games last year with an injury, or was that 2 years ago? But you never know. Guys at that position get hurt all the time, especially with the Patriots. It feels like they just have horrible luck when it comes to cornerback injuries. So I think, look, maybe behind closed doors, they're very confident in Juwan Williams. And I think there's a chance they are. They used a 2nd-round pick on the guy. But whether they have the answer or not, we on the outside don't know what that is. And that's something we need to figure out, or we're going to look to figure out between now and the start of the season.
All right, let's go back to this JJ Taylor question. Sure. Expectations for JJ Taylor. Now, when they drafted Ramondre Stevenson, I think that they sort of sent a message to us that they weren't looking for that James White pass catching back role as much as we thought. They were actually looking to fill Sony Michel's contract situation, similar to James White's, is going to be a free agent after the season. It does feel like they were more concerned about that role than the James White role in the draft. And maybe they feel like JJ Taylor is the guy in waiting in terms of that White successor. And he sort of took, he wasn't drafted like Shane Vereen or James White was, but he took a similar redshirt year as a rookie, as a UDFA, and kind of learned the ropes and sat behind the veterans, and maybe he has an opportunity this year to kind of fill into some of those things that Rex Burkhead did for them. I also wouldn't be surprised if he returns some kickoffs, if he can prove that he can have some ball security. I think he's got that ability too.
Yeah, I think for him, like, everybody wants to call him the third down back because he's fast and he's shifty. We just don't know what the pass blocking is going to look like. And at his size, it's going to be difficult. And I've talked about this a lot on this show, that the Patriots generally characterize their backs into one of two groups, right? Or one of three groups. You have the early down backs, the Sony Michel's, Damian Harris. Third down backs, guys like James White, Shane Vereen. And then sometimes they'll have that back that can do both, but is not usually going to be the most talented back on the roster. The guy who's good at everything, but not great at anything. Again, that's what Burkhead's been.
Right.
There has been a fourth category that we've really seen used sparingly, but it's Dion Lewis. It's an early down back that's not a power back. I wonder, and this is a little bit of an educated guess because we've heard Ivan Fears call him Little Dion. I wonder if he's going to just be the early down change of pace back. They generally haven't used that role. They just power backs on early downs, pass catching backs in passing situations. They haven't really changed pace early on in sequences. I wonder if they're going to start doing that, because that to me is the perfect role for JJ Taylor.
Yeah, he is a back that runs with a lot more power than you would expect for somebody of his size, because he's got so much juice. He's got so much explosiveness that he can convert that power, and then he's also so low to the ground because of his height that he can almost use that to his advantage to leverage things. So I think that he's a really bursty type of player, an explosive type of player. Can catch the ball a little bit, can run out of the backfield and in between the tackles a little bit. Like I mentioned, I think he can return kickoffs too. That was something that he did in college that I think can translate to the NFL game. So there's a role when you kind of put together his versatility on offense added to the special teams return ability. I think there is a role for him to be able to get on the field and get onto the game day roster this year. So I'm very fascinated to see what he looks like in camp and what he looks like in the preseason, because JJ Taylor is going to, if they have preseason games this year, which is the expectation, JJ Taylor is going to be one of those preseason monsters. So I don't think they're going to be able to cut him. I think they're going to have to keep him on the 53 if they want to keep the player. So it's going to be very interesting to see. A few more final questions here. This is, I think, a really fun question for Patriots fans now, because we get to pick on the Miami Dolphins a little bit. Who would you rather have, Mac Jones or Tua?
Oh, and as an Alabama fan too, for me, this one cuts deep. You know what? So for me, it's actually not hard. And I'll say Mac Jones because, and I'd be a hypocrite if I said otherwise, because with Jimmy Garoppolo, right? What have I been saying? I don't want a quarterback who's not going to play. Tua, as talented as he is, he's a smaller guy. He's got that hip injury. He's had trouble staying on the field. So, overall, if I have to build my team around one, give me Mac Jones, because he's going to be out there. In terms of raw talent, like who should have the better Madden rating, I'd probably go Tua, but I think it's close. But again, that availability is the best ability, and I'm taking Mac Jones because of that.
So I think the Miami Dolphins have taken some huge risks in the draft the last couple of years. And I find it actually hard to believe their coaching staff and Brian Flores and Chris Greer, their general manager, must feel really safe in their jobs, because they went Tua last year in the first round, and then Jalen Waddle and Jalen Phillips in the first round this year. Those are three guys that have some major durability concerns. I mean, Jalen Waddle comes in with a fractured ankle that he's recovering from last year from Alabama, and Jalen Phillips has a laundry list of injuries dating back to UCLA. He transfers to Miami and gets hurt. There's a long list of things wrong with him too. So they have three players at their last 3 first-round picks, 2 this year, that have injury histories, that have durability question marks. And I'm just really surprised. Look, it could hit, right? And if it hits, it's going to hit big, right? Because Tua is going to be a star. Jalen Waddle is going to be a star. Jalen Phillips is going to be a big-time pass rusher if all those things work out. But there's a really good chance this could all flop and completely fall on their face if they're not able to hold up in the NFL game. If I'm talking just ability, Tua versus Mac Jones, I think it's definitely Tua. But I do think you can talk about the fact that Tua 2 years ago at Alabama was throwing to Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, Devontae Smith, and Jalen Waddle, had a great offensive line, had a great running backs group, and all these types of things. And when we talk about knocking Mac Jones for his supporting cast, well, I don't understand how we're knocking Mac Jones for his supporting cast and not saying the same about Tua and his supporting cast, because it was better than Mac Jones's was. Tua played with 4 first-round picks at wide receiver. 4. And that's incredible. I mean, I don't even know if any college quarterbacks ever play with 4 first-round picks at once. And that's what Tua was throwing to. They were so stacked at wide receiver, Tua's last healthy the year there, that Jalen Waddle couldn't even get on the field. Jalen Waddle had a tough time carving out a role. So I think that's pretty incredible. But in terms of overall talent, it's definitely Tua. In terms of longevity in the NFL, then maybe Mac Jones has him there just because of the hip issues and stuff like that. But if you really want to get into this as Patriots fans, it's really looking at Tua and saying, hey, Tua played with just as much talent as Mac Jones. Joe Burrow played with just as much talent as Mac Jones. Even Justin Fields, to a degree, played with close or comparable talent to Mac Jones. So
Trevor
Lawrence, yeah, certainly. So those are the guys that you can look at and say, hey, everybody wants to knock Mac Jones for his supporting cast. These guys play with some pretty good football players too. Again, 4 first-round picks at wide receiver for Tua at Alabama. 4. I mean, that's that's incredible. Mac Jones maybe had 3 if you want to talk about Mechie, right? I mean, he's probably going to be a first-round pick too.
Well, just wait until this year's Alabama. Alabama lost 2 first-round receivers, a first-round running back. Najee went in the first, right? And a first-round quarterback. Their offense might be better next year. Bryce Young, #1 recruit in the country. Jaleel Billingsley, John Mechie. I can't remember the kid's name. I mentioned him earlier on Twitter. Their freshman wide receiver, the top freshman wide receiver recruit, looks unbelievable. I think Alabama's offense might be even better this year. Bryce Young, right? He has a chance. He has a chance to be, not this year because he's not going to be draft eligible, but he has a chance to be a 1-1.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of talent at Alabama. There's no doubt about it. But if you were a big Tua person, if you thought Tua was a transcendent talent and all this stuff, he was surrounded by the same exact supporting.
A Guy Hall, by the way. A Guy Hall is the wide receiver.
There you go. All right, let's wrap it up on a Jarrett Stidham question because there's a couple of Jarrett Stidham questions and we just sort of ignored them in the beginning. So let's wrap it up on a Jarrett Stidham question. What's going to happen with Jarrett Stidham? That's really the kind of question with his career arc here. Does he get cut? Does he get traded? Does he have any value? Do they keep 3 quarterbacks? What do you see happening with Stidham here?
I think Stidham ends up making the team because COVID's still going to be kind of a lingering issue. I don't know how much, but if they had a UDFA quarterback on the roster right now, I might change my mind and maybe they bring back Brian Hoyer or something. I think they're going to carry 3 quarterbacks. As much as I've knocked Jarrett Stidham at times, I don't know that there's a better option out there right now that they could bring in who would beat Stidham out for that 3rd quarterback job. Now, maybe he ends up on the practice squad. I don't know that they'd have trouble getting him there. And if they would, maybe they say we'll take a downgrade at the 3rd quarterback and we'll trade him. But I think in one way or another, Stidham hangs around for this year. I just don't know that he plays, pending, again, like COVID or something.
So the only question that I have with Jarrett, he's going to make the team, the 53-man roster, and they'll carry 3 quarterbacks, barring one thing. What if Jarrett Stidham has some Jacoby Brissett trade value? Right?
So that's what I'm saying. Like, I wonder if, Bill thought this guy was the guy at one point. Maybe we want him.
Right. Like maybe, I don't know. They traded Jacoby Brissett for Philip Dorsett, who obviously has his shortcomings as a player, isn't necessarily a game breaker or anything like that. But Philip Dorsett played a role on the team that won a Super Bowl. Right. He was a valuable role player on the 2018 team, and they had an opportunity there with the 3 quarterbacks to make a trade. They make a trade and they get a solid player out of it. So I do wonder, let's say same exact training camp preseason thing happens with Jarrett Stidham, where he plays a great 4th preseason game, just like Jacoby Brissett did a few years ago, throws for 350 and 4 touchdowns in a fourth preseason game or something like that, just to hike up his trade value. Does a team bite? And can they get a cast-off wide receiver from another team that it will actually have a role here in New England from elsewhere by trading Jarrett Stidham? That if they're going to move on from Jarrett Stidham, that's sort of where I'm looking as a possibility. I doubt he'll get cut. I'm sure he'll be here and be on the roster if he does not get traded. But I wouldn't rule out a trade. I kind of feel like that's a possibility.
And even if he does, they're going to carry 3 quarterbacks. I think that with the COVID and everything between maybe the 3rd guy's on the practice squad, but let's see if they bring in another quarterback right between now and the start of camp. I don't think that's a good sign for Jarrett Stidham.
Yeah, that's very true. And look, there's Cam stands, there's Stidham stands. Now Mac Jones is certainly starting to have his own hive here in New England. So it's going to be a fun camp regardless.
At the end of the day, because I see people bickering about this on Twitter, we're all Patriots fans at the end of the day, and you can certainly have your preference, but just don't root against your own team's quarterback. It comes across as so spoiled. I know we all miss Tom Brady. I know we do. Don't root against your own team's quarterback. Just don't. It reeks of you like Yankees. Oh, 27 rings. It like reeks of that. Just don't do it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Look, everybody has their preference. Everybody looks at it differently and thinks of things that, oh, this guy has this flaw and that guy has that flaw and this, that, or the other thing. At the end of the day, you got to count on Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels recognizing that the best quarterback is the best quarterback, right? The guy that's playing the best is going to play. And that's all it's going to come down to. It doesn't matter if you're a former MVP like Cam Newton or the 15th overall pick in the draft like Mac Jones. If you're not the best QB out there, I don't think it's going to happen. I would honestly think hell froze over. But if Jarrett Stidham ends up being the best quarterback in camp, would it stun you if he ends up getting a chance to start? I mean, it would stun me, but I don't know. I mean, maybe it's possible.
If he's the best, I think the best quarterback in camp is going to get to play. I think the stunner would be him being the best quarterback in camp. Right. But if he is, then yes, then I will be pounding the table for Jarrett Stidham to be the week 1 starter. If he blows everybody away in camp, you can all line up behind me saying Stidham should start, because at the end of the day, I just want to watch good quarterback play. I don't really care which quarterback it is. I just want to watch good quarterback play. That's all it comes down to.
That'd be a tough sell. All right, let's end it there on Jarrett Stidham. Hopefully making some noise. I think it'd be more exciting if he did. But Alex and I will be back on the podcast on Tuesday to talk more Patriots. I think we're going to start to try to break down the roster a little bit and get into position battles and things of that nature. So we'll be back on Tuesday with that show. On Thursday, we'll do another one of these Q&As. But until then, signing off for Alex Barth, I'm Evan Lazar. Thanks for watching, everybody.